courtroom fell silent as she stood. For months they had mocked her claims of military service. The prosecutor had built an airtight case. No records existed. No witnesses came forward. Veterans in the gallery watched with disgust as this woman apparently stole their honor. Then came the moment of truth. "Show us proof," the judge demanded. Without a word, she removed her jacket and rolled up her sleeve. The tattoo was small, geometric, seemingly insignificant. Until the retired general in the back row stood up and saluted. "From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of hidden courage resonates with you, subscribe for more untold stories of extraordinary people living among us." The imposing marble courthouse stood against a gray autumn sky, its columns rising like sentinels against approaching storm clouds. Inside, the polished wood and formal atmosphere of Courtroom 7 created an air of solemn judgment. Sanova Ellsworth sat alone at the defense table, her posture military straight despite the circumstances. At 38, her face showed weathered experience rather than age, dark eyes revealing nothing as they scanned the room with methodical precision. Her attorney, Thaddeus Lanford, a man in his 60s with thinning silver hair and a perpetually worried expression, shuffled papers beside her. His bow tie sat slightly askew, a small imperfection that seemed to bother him more than the case itself. The contrast between client and counsel was striking, his nervous energy amplifying her stillness. "Do you understand what we're facing here?" Thaddeus whispered, leaning close enough that his aftershave, something woody and old-fashioned, briefly cut through the courthouse's antiseptic smell. "They've built a mountain of evidence." Sanova met his gaze evenly. "I understand perfectly." The attorney sighed, a sound of resignation. "You hired me to defend you, but you've given me nothing to work with. No documentation, no witnesses, not even a compelling personal narrative." His fingers drummed against a nearly empty case file. "The prosecution has 14 witnesses." "I'm aware," she replied, her voice low and controlled. The courtroom gradually filled with Veterans Affairs officials in dark suits, military personnel in dress uniforms, and curious spectators drawn by the unusual nature of the case. Court reporter Wylan Cobb, a man in his 50s with reading glasses perched on a bulbous nose, prepared his stenotype machine with practiced movements. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff stepped forward. "All rise," the Honorable Judge Aveline Torset presiding. Judge Torset entered with brisk efficiency. In her 60s, with steel-gray hair cut in a severe bob and half-moon spectacles, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had heard every possible argument in her courtroom. She nodded once to the assembly before taking her seat. "Be seated," she commanded, her voice carrying without effort. She peered down at the docket before her. "Case number 47,293, United States versus Ellsworth. Charges of fraud, false personation of a decorated officer, and theft of government benefits." She looked up, her gaze landing directly on Sanova. "Are both parties ready to proceed?" Assistant U.S. Attorney Meridian Covey rose from the prosecution table. At 45, he cut an impressive figure in his perfectly tailored suit. His tie knotted with geometric precision. "The United States is ready, Your Honor." "Defense is ready," Thaddeus replied, his voice slightly less assured. Judge Torset nodded. "Mr. Cove, your opening statement." Covey approached the jury box with measured steps, a consummate performer who knew his audience. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, taking a moment to make eye contact with each juror before speaking. "Your Honor, members of the jury, the United States will prove that Sanova Ellsworth systematically and deliberately fabricated an extensive military career, falsely claiming participation in classified operations to obtain $457,000 in veteran benefits over 7 years. He gestured dramatically toward Sanova, who remained expressionless. "Ms. Ellsworth claims to have served in operations that, according to multiple Defense Department officials, never existed. She has provided no evidence, no witnesses, no documentation. Nothing but stories designed to defraud taxpayers and dishonor the sacrifice of genuine veterans." Covey walked slowly across the front of the courtroom. "This case is about more than money, though that sum alone warrants your attention. This case is about integrity, about honor, about ensuring that when we thank someone for their service, that service actually happened. He paused for effect. The defendant has perpetrated one of the most comprehensive stolen valor schemes ever documented, and the evidence will leave you with no doubt of her guilt. As Covey continued outlining the case, Sanuva's attention briefly shifted to the spectators. The gallery was filled with various observers, most watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright contempt. In the third row sat Brigadier General Hastings Caldwell, retired, his posture as rigid as hers despite his 70 years. His weathered face revealed nothing as their eyes briefly met. Covey concluded his opening statement with a flourish. By the end of this trial, you will understand the depth of Ms. Ellsworth's deception and the damage it has caused to those who truly serve. Thank you. Judge Torset turned to the defense table. Counselor, your opening statement. Thaddeus rose slowly, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. Unlike Cove's confident stride, he approached the jury with a slight stoop, as if already carrying the weight of defeat. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice gaining some strength as he spoke. This case appears straightforward on the surface. The prosecution will present official records showing no evidence of my client's service. They will parade experts who will testify about stolen valor and the psychological profiles of those who falsify military credentials. He paused, adjusting his glasses. But I ask you to look beyond paperwork, to consider that sometimes the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. He gestured towards Senova. My client understands the gravity of these charges, but maintains that her service record speaks for itself. Judge Torset leaned forward, her expression skeptical. The problem, counselor, is that according to the Pentagon, that record doesn't exist. Several jurors nodded in agreement, and Thaddeus faltered, his momentum broken. Senova watched him struggle, then wrote something on a legal pad and slid it across the table. He read it, frowned deeply, and shook his head firmly before continuing with a less confident tone. The defense will show that Ms. Ellsworth's character and conduct are consistent with someone who has served honorably. We ask that you reserve judgment until all evidence has been presented. He returned to his seat, the brevity of his statement highlighting the prosecution's advantage. Judge Torset nodded briskly. Mr. Cove, call your first witness. Covey stood. The government calls Darian Westcliff. A thin man with precise movements approached the stand. After being sworn in, he sat with perfect posture, hands folded in his lap. Please state your name and position for the record, Covey requested. Darian Westcliff, Senior Administrator of Military Personnel Records at the Pentagon. And how long have you held this position, Mr. Westcliff? 17 years next month. Cove nodded, establishing credibility before the jury. In your capacity as records administrator, what access do you have to military service records? Complete access. My office maintains digital and physical archives of all personnel who have served in any capacity within the United States military, going back to 1973. For records predating digital systems, we maintain comprehensive cross-referenced archives. And were you asked to search these records for information pertaining to the defendant, Senova Ellsworth? I was. Upon receiving the subpoena, I conducted a thorough search of all branches, including classified sections accessible only to personnel with appropriate clearance. Covey approached with a document. And what were your findings? I've searched all archives dating back 20 years. There is absolutely no record of a Senova Ellsworth serving in any branch of the armed forces. None whatsoever? Not in active duty, reserves, or any special operations division to which I have access, which is comprehensive. Could these records have been lost or misplaced? Westcliff straightened, professionally offended. No, our systems have redundancies specifically to prevent such occurrences. For someone to have served as the defendant claims, particularly with multiple deployments and decorations, there would be digital and physical documentation across numerous systems. Covey nodded. And in your professional experience, is it possible for someone to have legitimately served without generating any of this documentation? It is not. Even the most classified operations leave administrative footprints, though those details might be redacted from general access. The basic fact of service would still be recorded. From her seat, Senova watched silently, betraying nothing. Her hands remained folded on the table before her, neither fidgeting nor showing tension. Cove continued methodically building his case. Mr. Westcliff, the defendant has claimed participation in something called Operation Cerberus Gate. Did your search reveal any operation by this name? It did not. I consulted with operational naming authorities who confirm no such operation has been designated under any branch of service. Thaddeus rose for cross-examination, his approach tentative. Mr. Westcliff, are you personally familiar with every classified operation conducted by United States Special Forces? Westcliff hesitated. I'm familiar with their documentation protocols, not operational details. So there could theoretically be operations so classified that even their names remain restricted? Theoretically, but those would still generate personnel records, even if heavily classified. Thaddeus pressed on. Are there any circumstances under which military personnel records might be deliberately purged or redacted from all systems? Before Westcliff could answer, Covey was on his feet. Objection calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Torset ruled. Thaddeus tried another approach. Mr. Westcliff, has your office ever discovered errors in personnel records? Occasionally, minor discrepancies occur, but nothing approaching a complete absence of records for active service. No further questions, Thaddeus concluded, returning to his seat with a sigh. As the morning progressed, Covey called his second witness, Colonel Jericho Blackwood, a decorated officer with 30 years of service who now worked in military awards and commendations. His testimony focused on the medals Senova allegedly claimed. Colonel Blackwood sat ramrod straight in the witness chair, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons and medals from decades of service. His testimony carried the weight of someone who understood the value of military honors from personal experience. Colonel Blackwood, could you explain the significance of the Distinguished Service Cross? Cove asked. Blackwood nodded solemnly. The Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest military decoration that can be awarded to a member of the United States Army. It's awarded for extreme gallantry and risk of life in actual combat with an armed enemy force. And how rare is this decoration? Extremely rare. Only about 13,000 have been awarded since World War I. Covey held up a photograph, entering it as evidence. And this image shows the defendant wearing this exact medal at a Veterans Day ceremony, correct? Blackwood studied the image briefly. Correct. Along with several other high-level commendations that would indicate extraordinary service, which your records indicate she never performed. Correct. It's an insult to those who earn these honors. Through it all, Senova remained composed, her expression revealing nothing as the prosecution systematically dismantled her claimed military history. Judge Torset called for a brief recess after Colonel Blackwood's testimony. The courtroom emptied quickly, spectators filing out in clusters of whispered conversation. Thaddeus guided Senova to a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom, closing the door firmly behind them. This is going worse than I anticipated, he said, loosening his bow tie with one finger. Blackwood was devastating. The jury connected with him. Senova stood by the narrow window, looking out at the courthouse plaza below. He believes what he's saying. They all do, Thaddeus replied, spreading documents across the table. That's what makes this so difficult. They're not being malicious. They're presenting facts as their records show them. He removed his glasses, cleaning them with his handkerchief. They're destroying you. Give me something to work with. Senova turned from the window, her expression unchanged. You know I can't. Then why hire me? Frustration crept into his voice. I can't defend against evidence if you won't let me counter it. I can't put you on the stand if you won't testify. What exactly am I supposed to do here? Because I needed someone to witness this, she said quietly. Thaddeus stared at her, bewildered. Witness what? Your conviction? Because that's where this is headed. He gestured to his nearly empty case file. The prosecution has documentation, expert testimony, and photographic evidence. We have character witnesses who can only say you seemed like an honest person. A knock at the door signaled the end of recess. Senova straightened her jacket, smoothing invisible wrinkles. It will be sufficient. When court resumed, Covey called his next witness, Dr. Octavia Merriweather, a psychiatrist specializing in fabricated identity disorders. With her precise diction and academic credentials, she presented the clinical perspective the prosecution needed. Dr. Merriweather, based on your review of the evidence and Ms. Ellsworth's documented claims, have you formed a professional opinion about her behavior? Covey asked. The psychiatrist folded her hands. I have. Without having examined Ms. Ellsworth personally, I can only speak to the pattern of behavior evidenced in the documentation. That said, the pattern is consistent with what we call stolen valor syndrome, a subset of fabricated identity disorder, where an individual creates an elaborate military history. And what characterizes this syndrome? Typically, we see increasing elaboration over time. What might begin as simple misrepresentations gradually expands into detailed stories of classified missions or extraordinary heroism. The individual often becomes deeply invested in maintaining this identity, sometimes to the point where they genuinely begin to believe their fabricated military history. Covey nodded. In your experience, do people with this syndrome typically seek tangible benefits from their deception? It varies. Some are primarily motivated by the social status and respect afforded to veterans, particularly those with distinguished service records. Others may indeed seek financial benefits, preferential treatment, or other material advantages. As Dr. Merriweather continued her testimony, Senova wrote something on a legal pad but didn't pass it to her lawyer. She simply folded the note and tucked it into her jacket pocket, her expression remaining neutral. Thaddeus's cross-examination did little to undermine the expert's testimony. His questions about the possibility of misdiagnosis and the limitations of forming clinical opinions without direct examination merely allowed Dr. Merriweather to demonstrate her professional caution, ultimately strengthening her credibility with the jury. The prosecution's parade of witnesses continued through the afternoon. Veterans Affairs administrators testified about benefit applications and disbursements. Document examiners confirmed the signatures on various forms. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an increasingly solid wall of evidence against Senova Ellsworth. By late afternoon, Covey called his final witness of the day, Pierce Augustin, a Veterans Affairs fraud investigator whose testimony would provide the capstone to the prosecution's case. Augustin, a man in his early 50s with the trim build of a former athlete, took the stand with practiced ease. After establishing his credentials, including 15 years investigating benefits fraud, Covey directed him to the heart of the matter. Mr. Augustin, when did your office begin investigating the defendant? Approximately 18 months ago. We received an anonymous tip questioning Ms. Ellsworth's military service claims after she spoke at a Veterans Day event at Westlake Community College. Covey produced a series of photographs. And what did your investigation reveal? Augustin leaned forward slightly. We've documented at least 7 occasions where the defendant presented herself as a decorated veteran, including at events with Gold Star families who lost loved ones in actual combat. The photographs were entered into evidence and displayed for the jury, showing Senova at various veterans events. In some, she wore a navy blue blazer with military pins and medals. In others, she stood among groups of verified veterans. Based on your investigation, what benefits did Ms. Ellsworth receive as a result of her claims? VA disability compensation totaling $217,450 over 5 years for injuries allegedly sustained during combat operations. Healthcare benefits valued at approximately $143,000. Educational benefits under the GI Bill worth $76,500 for a master's degree program. Housing allowances and various other veteran-specific benefits bringing the total to $457,328. Covey approached the defendant's table. Ms. Ellsworth, would you care to explain why you appear in these photos wearing a Distinguished Service Cross you never earned? Thaddeus rose quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is addressing my client directly, rather than through proper examination. Sustained, Judge Torset ruled. Mr. Cove, you know better. Covey nodded, unperturbed by the mild rebuke. Mr. Augustin, in your professional experience investigating fraud cases, Where would you rank this case in terms of scope and sophistication? Among the most comprehensive I've encountered. The defendant has spun elaborate tales about serving in classified units. Yet, not one person has come forward to verify these claims. As Augustin continued his testimony, Senova noticed General Caldwell studying her intently from his seat in the gallery. Their eyes met briefly across the courtroom. Something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of recognition that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Covey produced another document. I'd like to enter into evidence Ms. Ellsworth's VA application, where she claims participation in Operation Cerberus Gate. This caused subtle reactions throughout the courtroom. A government observer in the back row touched his earpiece. General Caldwell straightened almost imperceptibly in his seat. A court security officer near the door glanced sharply toward Senova. An operation that never existed, Covey concluded, placing the document on the evidence table. Judge Torset checked her watch. We'll adjourn for today and resume tomorrow morning at 9. Mr. Cove, will you have additional witnesses? Just one brief witness tomorrow, Your Honor, and then the government will rest. Very well. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom began to empty, Thaddeus gathered his materials with dejected efficiency. They've built an airtight case, he muttered. Tomorrow I'll try to create some reasonable doubt during cross-examination, but honestly, I'm running out of options. Senova nodded, watching General Caldwell as he exited the courtroom. The retired general paused briefly at the door, looking back once before disappearing into the hallway. The next morning began with Covey's final witness, a record specialist from the Veterans Administration who testified about the specific benefits Senova had received. The testimony was brief, merely closing the loop on the financial aspects of the case. When Cove announced, "The government rests, Your Honor," a sense of finality settled over the courtroom. Judge Torset turned to the defense table. "Mr. Lanford, is the defense prepared to present its case?" Thaddeus rose slowly. "Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to request a brief recess to confer with my client." Granted, 15 minutes. In the same small conference room as the day before, Thaddeus paced while Senova sat calmly at the table. "We have 3 character witnesses waiting," he said, "former colleagues who will testify to your integrity, but it won't be enough against this mountain of evidence." He stopped pacing and faced her directly. "Senova, I need to know if you want to testify. It's risky, especially with the case they've built, but it might be our only chance to present your side directly to the jury." "I won't testify," she replied evenly. "Then what do you want me to do? What defense can I possibly mount?" "Present the character witnesses as planned, then rest our case." Thaddeus stared at her in disbelief. "That's it? You're not going to fight this?" "I am fighting," she said quietly. "Just not in the way you expect." When court resumed, Thaddeus presented the 3 character witnesses as planned. Each spoke briefly about Senova's integrity, her quiet competence, her willingness to help others. None could offer any direct knowledge of her military service. Against the prosecution's case, their testimony seemed insubstantial, like throwing pebbles against a fortress wall. After the 3rd witness stepped down, Thaddeus rose. "Your Honor, the defense rests." Judge Torset appeared mildly surprised. "Very well. We'll proceed to closing arguments." Cove's closing argument was masterful, a methodical recounting of the evidence presented, each point building logically to an inescapable conclusion of guilt. He emphasized the harm done not just to taxpayers, but to genuine veterans whose sacrifices were diminished by such deception. When it was Thaddeus's turn, he approached the jury with visible reluctance. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution has presented substantial evidence suggesting my client has no military record. I won't insult your intelligence by denying that fact." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I ask you to consider why someone with no prior criminal history, with a reputation for integrity among those who know her best, would embark on such an elaborate deception." He gestured toward Senova, who sat straight-backed and attentive at the defense table. "There are circumstances where silence is not an admission of guilt, but adherence to a deeper code of honor. Ms. Ellsworth has maintained her dignity throughout these proceedings, refusing to compromise certain principles even at great personal cost." After both sides had presented their closing arguments, Judge Torset addressed Senova directly. Ms. Ellsworth, before I give instructions to the jury, is there anything you wish to say on your own behalf? A hush fell over the courtroom. Sanova rose slowly, her composure unbroken. Your Honor, I've maintained silence not out of guilt, but obligation. Judge Torset leaned forward slightly. Ms. Ellsworth, at this point, the court will entertain any evidence you have of your service. Thaddeus rose to object, but Sanova placed a hand on his arm. The attorney subsided, watching with a mixture of resignation and curiosity as his client stepped away from the defense table. Sanova moved to the center of the courtroom with measured steps, her movements precise and deliberate. The spectators fell silent, attention fixed on this woman who had offered no defense throughout the trial. Even Covey watched with curiosity rather than triumph, sensing an unexpected shift in the proceedings. Your Honor, Sanova began, her voice clear and steady. I understand the evidence presented against me. I understand how it appears. She paused, scanning the courtroom briefly. What I'm about to do violates protocols I've honored for 14 years. She slowly removed her blazer, folding it carefully over her arm. Thaddeus half rose from his chair, confusion evident on his face, but remained silent. The courtroom watched in puzzlement as Sanova stood in her simple white blouse. Operational Directive 119-7 prohibits acknowledgement of certain units, but I believe this constitutes exigent circumstances. She turned to face the gallery and deliberately rolled up her left sleeve to the elbow. The movement was unhurried, almost ceremonial. As the fabric folded back, it revealed an intricate geometric tattoo on her forearm, dark lines forming an abstract pattern with embedded symbology. To most observers, it appeared decorative, perhaps tribal, but certainly not evidential. Judge Torset frowned. Ms. Ellsworth, I fail to see how a tattoo constitutes evidence of military service. Before Sanova could respond, movement came from the gallery. Brigadier General Hastings Caldwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The retired officer's weathered face had transformed. The clinical detachment replaced by recognition and something akin to respect. Caldwell walked forward with military precision, stopping at the bar. He faced Sanova and rendered a perfect military salute, held with absolute stillness. Nightingale Squadron, 2008 to 2014. Cerberus Gate, Pantheon Shield, he said, his voice carrying in the silent courtroom. From the back row, another man in civilian clothes stood. Then a court security officer near the door. A ripple of recognition moved through specific individuals scattered throughout the courtroom, each rising to their feet one by one. Kova looked around in confusion, his confident demeanor faltering. Your Honor, I don't understand what's happening. Judge Torset appeared equally perplexed, her gaze moving between Senova's tattoo and the standing individuals. Neither do I, counsel. A man in a dark suit who had been sitting quietly in the back row approached the bench. He leaned forward, showing credentials to Judge Torset, while speaking in hushed tones. The judge's expression changed from confusion to shock as she examined the identification, then listened to his whispered explanation. The courtroom remained in suspended animation, Sanova standing with her sleeve rolled up, General Caldwell maintaining his salute, various individuals on their feet, and everyone else watching in bewilderment. Judge Torset cleared her throat. This court is now in recess. Bailiff, clear the gallery. Mr. Cove, approach the bench immediately. As spectators were ushered out, many protesting the unexpected interruption, Sanova calmly rolled down her sleeve and put her jacket back on. She exchanged a brief nod with General Caldwell as he lowered his salute and stepped back. Thaddeus approached his client, his voice hushed. What just happened? Justice, she replied simply. The courtroom emptied except for essential personnel. Judge Torset, Prosecutor Cove, Thaddeus, Sanova, and 3 men in dark suits remained. The court reporter had been dismissed, and the recording equipment turned off. For nearly an hour, voices were kept low, documents exchanged, and phone calls made from the judge's chambers. Cove's expression transformed from confusion to disbelief, to something approaching embarrassment as information was shared. When Judge Torset finally returned to the bench, her demeanor had completely changed. The stern efficiency had been replaced by something more solemn, almost deferential. Court is back in session, she announced, though the gallery remained empty except for the few authorized individuals. All charges against Ms. Aylesworth are dismissed with prejudice. The record of these proceedings is sealed by order of national security. Ms. Aylesworth, on behalf of this court, I extend my apologies. Senova nodded slightly, accepting without celebration. She gathered her belongings while Covey sat at the prosecution table, staring at a document bearing official seals. Thaddeus looked between them, still trying to process the dramatic reversal. As they prepared to leave the courtroom, General Caldwell approached. Up close, the lines on his face mapped decades of service and command. 14 years since Mostar. Never thought I'd see you again, he said quietly. 14 years of silence, she replied. How many of us are left? Not enough. They shared a moment of understanding before Caldwell produced a small metal object from his pocket, a challenge coin with the same symbol as her tattoo. He pressed it into her palm. They owe you more than an apology. Senova closed her fingers around the coin. What I did wasn't for recognition. That's precisely why you deserve it, Caldwell replied. He straightened, offering another crisp salute before turning to leave. Thaddeus watched the exchange with growing comprehension. You really did serve. Yes, and the records really don't exist. Correct. Were you ever going to tell me? Senova considered the question. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. Outside the courthouse, reporters who had been following the stolen valor case clamored for information about the abrupt dismissal. The men in dark suits intercepted them with practiced efficiency, offering a prepared statement about procedural issues and insufficient evidence. Senova and Thaddeus exited through a side door, avoiding the media entirely. In the parking lot, Thaddeus finally found his voice again. I've been practicing law for 35 years. I've never seen anything like what happened in there. He shook his head in wonder. All this time, I thought I was defending someone who needed help creating reasonable doubt. Instead, I was standing next to someone who could have ended the trial at any moment. It wasn't that simple, Senova replied, unlocking her car. Revealing that tattoo violated multiple security protocols. There will be consequences. Worse than a fraud conviction? Different, she said, but I calculated the risk was justified. Thaddeus extended his hand. Whatever you did, whoever you served with, thank you, and I'm sorry for doubting you. Senova shook his hand with a firm grip. You did exactly what I hired you to do. Witness the process. 2 weeks later, Senova stood in a small, windowless conference room deep within the Pentagon. The room contained only a long table and 8 chairs, but the power concentrated there was palpable. 3 high-ranking military officers and 2 intelligence officials sat opposite her, their expressions grave. A senior official, whose name had not been provided, placed a folder on the table between them. Ms. Aylesworth, your actions placed classified information at risk. With respect, sir, I revealed nothing about operations, locations, or personnel. The tattoo alone means nothing to anyone without prior knowledge. Nevertheless, protocols were violated. The official paused, studying her. However, after reviewing the circumstances, we understand you were placed in an impossible position. The very secrecy that protected our operations left you vulnerable to these accusations. He opened the folder. These records will remain classified, but your benefits and status are fully restored, backdated to cover the period when payments were suspended. The nation owes you a debt we can never publicly acknowledge. Senova accepted the documents with grace, scanning their contents briefly before returning them to the folder. Additionally, the official continued, we've created a secure verification protocol for the future. Should similar situations arise for you or others who served in your capacity, there's now a confidential channel for confirmation without compromising security. After the meeting concluded, Senova walked the Pentagon's corridors escorted by a young lieutenant who maintained a respectful silence. As they passed through the western section of the building, Senova paused before a wall displaying military honors. In a secluded corner, partly obscured from general view, was a small plaque with no names, only a simple geometric pattern matching her tattoo. She touched it briefly, her fingers tracing the familiar lines. "Ma'am?" the lieutenant inquired, uncertain why they had stopped. "Just paying respects," Senova replied, continuing toward the exit. Outside the Pentagon, Thaddeus waited beside his car as arranged. His bow tie was straight today, his posture more confident than during the trial. "Everything resolved?" he asked as she approached. "As much as it can be." He nodded, understanding the limitations. "You know, I've been practicing law a long time, won big cases, lost others, but I've never felt as useless as I did in your trial." "You weren't useless," Senova corrected. "You were necessary, just not in the way you expected." They walked toward the parking area in comfortable silence until Thaddeus spoke again. "Will you ever tell me what really happened? What Mostar was? What Cerberus Gate meant?" Senova looked at him with genuine regret. "Some stories aren't mine alone to tell." She extended her hand, which he shook warmly. They parted ways at the visitor parking area, Thaddeus watching as she walked toward her own vehicle. In the distance, the Washington Monument stood against the clear sky, a reminder of the nation she had served in shadows. A group of young military recruits passed by in formation, their faces eager and determined, oblivious to the unassuming hero in their midst. One nodded politely as she passed, a simple acknowledgement between strangers. Senova returned the nod with a slight smile. She had never served for recognition, had never expected thanks. The quiet knowledge of duty fulfilled had always been sufficient. As she walked away from the Pentagon, her steps were light, despite the weight of secrets she would carry always. On her drive home, she passed Arlington National Cemetery, its endless rows of white markers standing in silent testimony to visible sacrifice. For a moment, she thought of other sacrifices, unmarked and unacknowledged, carried only in the memories of those who survived. Her phone rang, displaying a number she hadn't seen in years. Perhaps it was time to reconnect with others who understood. Perhaps in their shared silence there was a different kind of honor, one that required no public validation. She answered the call, simply stating her name. "Nightingale still flies," came the response, a voice from the past. "Always," she replied, turning toward a future where her service, though never publicly celebrated, was finally acknowledged by those who mattered most, those who had stood beside her in the shadows of history.